Good morning, everyone. Can I ask everyone to find a place that they feel comfortable in today? If you haven't had a chance to collect a name tag, the chance will be forthcoming. Do not panic. My name is Eleanor Jackson, and I'm a poet and a performer, an arts producer, fellow traveller, and I'm very excited to be your MC and host for today's Fair Play Symposium. Thank you to the crew at the Wheeler Centre and the hardworking team at Diversity Arts Australia for bringing us together. I know that we are all here almost stressfully on time for an arts audience, but I'm going to take that as a real indication of the passion and the dedication and the commitment that is already gathered in the room here at the extremely timely 9:07, which is when my stage manager always used to say, it's like start 7 minutes after, and then we go. So to start us off in the very finest of fashions, it is my delight to be able to welcome Janet Gulpin, who is representing Nawit Caroline Briggs and the Boonwurrung Foundation. Please put your hands together.
Thank you. Wominjeka. Wominjeka is the word welcome in Boonwurrung language. I would like to pay my respect to my ancestors, to all of you here today for the Fair Play Symposium Equity and Inclusion in the Creative Industries, also to any of our First Peoples here today. I also acknowledge my elders, past, present, future, to any emerging leaders of our communities present here today. As a representative and family member of the Boonwurrung, Melbourne's First People, I am pleased to be able to welcome you here today. We are especially pleased to recognise the commitment that you've made here today in paying respect to the spirit of this land and to its First Peoples. Through this, you have shown the willingness to honour sacred ground. The Boonwurrung are custodians of the land that stretches from Wilson's Promontory all the way to the mouth of the Werribee River, approximately 270 kilometres of coastal land and encompassing both of our beautiful bays, Port Phillip and Western Port. So when you are walking or travelling around our country, you have been welcomed by us for all of your journeys. I also want to speak to you today about the 4 values that we all should share: learning, respecting, celebrating and honouring. Today we are celebrating this event and we are all also honouring sacred ground. And by doing this, we honour our community. Today is also a day of learning, and through learning we respect each other. It is important for all Victorians and guests to understand and appreciate the history and the culture of the Indigenous people of Melbourne, who've played a significant role in the development of Melbourne, both before and after European arrival. And unfortunately, they are unknown to many people who live in this land. The struggle to preserve their culture and traditions began with the ancestors in the 1830s. One of the lessons that we should take from this struggle was the way that the elders and leaders of the day forged alliances that led to many of the achievements that we take for granted today. As Australians, while we may have all descended from different clans and language groups and from countries all across the world, we can all learn from this lesson from our elders and the leaders of the days past. The word welcome in Boonwurrung is Wominjeka, but it also translates to come with purpose. It is also a contract between the people as the custodians of this land and yourselves. to ensure that our laws are adhered to and to guarantee safe passage to those who ask. According to tradition, the land has always been protected by the creator Bunjil, who travels as an eagle, and by one who protects the waterways and travels as a crow. Bunjil taught the Bunwarang to always welcome guests, but he always required the Bunwarang to ask all visitors to make two promises that I will ask of you here today: to obey the laws of Bunjil and not to harm the children or the land of Bunjil. This commitment was made through the exchange of a small bow dipped in the water and the spoken words, Waminjaka. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Janet. I loved that phrase, to come with purpose, and I think that we can all agree that this is a room that has come together with some very specific purposes, and that reminder of place and a kind of awareness of what it means to be learning, respecting, celebrating and honouring, I think are all incredible ethos that we could allow to thread through these next 2 days together. To open up today's proceedings, I am delighted to welcome Lena Nahals. Oh dear. We all knew it was going to happen, and I just thought, would it happen so early? Lena, for those of you who don't know her, is the Executive Director of Diversity Arts Australia. She has more than 2 decades experience in arts, cultural and media organisations, and has managed a range of screen and digital media-based initiatives that have engaged literally thousands of people, with her particular passion and energy being around enabling the voices of women, refugees, migrants and young people. Please welcome Lena.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. And thank you so much, Janet Galpin, for your welcome and for sharing those 4 values of learning, respecting, honouring and valuing, and also reminding us about the struggles of the elders and how we can also, all of us, learn from those struggles, because I think some of the discussions today will be kind of talking about struggles, but also kind of remembering that those struggles are not a new thing or a decade-long thing or a 20-year-old thing, that they've much longer history. I too would like to acknowledge that we're meeting today on the traditional lands of the Kulin Nation, and to pay my respects to the elders past and present, and the elders of other First Nations communities who may be here today, and to extend that respect to other First Nations people in the community and amongst us. And thank you, Eleanor, for those opening remarks and your introduction. I feel really lucky to have Eleanor here as our MC today. I can't imagine many other people who would make such a perfect MC. I don't mind if my name's said a little bit incorrectly, because we've got Eleanor here and that's what counts. And thank you so much for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge Martin Foley, Minister for the Creative Industries, Deborah Williams, CEO of the Creative Diversity Network in the UK, Diversity Arts Australia's board members Seb Chan, Jade Lilly and Francisca Pena, who are here today, Michael Williams, Director of the Wheeler Centre, and Genevieve Greaves. So it's so good to be here today. Last week, the new Australia Council CEO, Adrian Collette, did his first major interview, and the focus of it was on diversity. So it feels very timely to be here for that reason, but also in the for many, many reasons, not just that reason, but it seems like it's kind of a nice little segue into today. And it's also good to be here in the aftermath of an Oscars ceremony that saw diverse creatives recognised to an unprecedented extent. 3 of the 4 top acting awards were won by actors of colour. Of course, there's a bit of debate about the best picture this year, but the general diversity of the winners should still be acknowledged, because this sort of thing doesn't happen automatically. It takes hard work and years of campaigning. For any artists outside the dominant culture, First Nations people, culturally diverse people, people with disability, other groups who are not part of mainstream or dominant cultures. The path to recognition like that is never easy. Many of us who are here know that this recognition hasn't come without a huge amount of work, much of it by people who remain unacknowledged and unrecognised. And for the majority of us who aren't being handed little gold statuettes, sorry, we have none to hand out today, the work continues. We know from the research and the stats and from the many gatherings and anecdotal evidence that not enough has changed in the last few decades. We're still having the same conversations about equity and inclusion, about power and privilege. We know about the inequities and the barriers, and we know how important it is to share the experience we've all gained in the trenches. This symposium seeks to do this and to support greater connections and solidarity across areas of work. So what is Diversity Arts Australia? For those of you who don't know, we're the key national organisation advocating for cultural equity and for action that directly addresses the systemic barriers that artists and creative practitioners from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds face. We work in partnership and solidarity with other organisations and social movements, which is what makes projects like Fair Play possible. For this symposium and for the broader Fair Play project that we'll be launching today, we worked with organisations and individuals whose focus is on First Nations and people with disability. Our partners are invaluable to us and they enable us to bring leading practice from each area into our work. And the effectiveness of our work depends on the strength of these partnerships. So that's why spaces like today are important and why it's so good to be launching the Fair Play project, an equity and inclusion capacity building project for organisations that receive multi-year funding through Creative Victoria. The program seeks to address barriers to participation by underrepresented groups in Victoria's creative industries with a focus on three groups: First Nations people, people with disability and people from underrepresented culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Working with organisations who might need support in one or more of these areas, it will work with 20 organisations over 2 years, and it will include tailored mentoring and training over an intense 6-month period to work towards transformative and systemic and sustainable organisational change. So expressions of interest are currently open and close at the end of March, so please think about applying if you are one of those organisations. Fair Play was initiated and funded by Creative Victoria and was a result of deep engagement with the sector through consultation and co-design. And to my knowledge, this program's pretty unique. There's nothing like it elsewhere in Australia. Importantly, the focus of it is on capacity building, something that we know isn't really prioritised enough in our sector. It means Creative Victoria and the Victorian Government is investing in strategic interventions with an eye on long-term and lasting change. And in particular, I'd like to make mention of the Minister for the Creative Industries, Martin Foley, and to acknowledge both his leadership and Creative Victoria's leadership in this area and its commitment to systemic change, as demonstrated by not only this project but a suite of projects that have been funded called SIP and DIP, Social Impact Program and Diversity Inclusion Program initiatives. So one of our prime motivations for holding this event is to draw together the work that's already happening in Victoria in this space and under the banner of equity and inclusion. Although the symposium is focused on Victoria, it's important to situate it within a national and an international context. We have attendees today from across Australia, including WA, South Australia, Tasmania, the ACT, New South Wales, from the Australia Council for the Arts, from Screen Australia and from AFTRS. We have 4 international guests joining us: Deborah Williams, who I've already mentioned, from the UK, and three other artists who are here as part of the Intersect program, which is a partnership between the British Council, Creative Victoria and Diversity Arts. A massive thanks to, I also wanted to importantly thank all of the people who have made this symposium possible, and the many people who we've spoken to, had many conversations met with, who have helped kind of shape today and the discussions and the way in which they're framed. Thank you to our presenting partner and fabulous host, the Wheeler Centre and their incredible team, Creative Victoria for their vision and providing core support, our important partners in the Fair Play project, all of whom are here today, Koorie Heritage Trust, Arts Access Victoria, the British Council, Arts Front and Feral Arts, Regional Arts Victoria, Multicultural Arts Victoria and Screen Australia. I'd like to mention our sponsor, AI Media, a company whose mission is all about inclusion and access. They've provided sponsorship via the live stream, the live captioning, and also the Facebook live captioning. Thank you, Stephen Thomas, for your commitment and for being here today. I'd also like to acknowledge the important team behind this. I know it's sometimes a bit hard when people are reading off a list of names, but I feel like it's so important to acknowledge the people who have done so much hard work. The team at Diversity Arts, Eugenia Flynn, Paula Aboud, Jinghua Chien, June Kwok, Sonia Mermand, Monique Choi, Glaza Perez, Andy Coe, and everyone else who worked on this both in and outside of the room today. We strive to make our events as accessible as possible and to engage people who couldn't be in the room in the discussions. We know we had people who wanted to be in the room who couldn't be because we have a waiting list. And we also know that even if we could have so many more people in the room, we'd still want to share the knowledge that comes out today more broadly with the sector. And so in order to do this, we've ensured that the symposium is Auslan interpreted and audio described, live streamed and live captioned. We're video documenting and we'll produce a series of short films to share some of the discussions and outcomes. We'll also share the talks via our podcast, The Colour Cycle. And to help us reflect on the discussions, we have engaged 3 citizen journalists who Eleanor will introduce shortly, led by our writer-in-residence, Claire G. Coleman. Victorian academic and artist Dr. Margaret Mayhew is here today to document the symposium and produce a short report that she'll give back to you to give feedback into. And we take this approach again because we don't want these conversations to end when we leave tomorrow. So we want them to extend them and to keep them alive and to ensure that the issues are identified, shared and followed up and acted on. Thank you all for bringing your knowledge and insight into the room. I'm very excited to be part of the conversations that will take place here today. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lena, for starting us off in such a warm, welcoming, and then also multi-layered way. It's clear that this is an endeavour of multiple hearts and minds, and that the things that you see up here on stage are really just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the conversation that we know so many of you are all having in your respective organisations, in your respective practice areas, and as artists and creators yourselves. I am very happy to welcome our next guest, which is Mr. Martin Foley, the Victorian Minister for the Creative Industries, but also the Victorian Minister for Mental Health and the Minister for Equality, 3 portfolios that I think immediately speak to you about a passion and energy for social inclusion and for understanding the needs of the most vulnerable of our Victorian community members. In his bio, he quips that his one creative talent is recognising that politics is showbiz for ugly people. I wish to reassure him, however, Mr. Foley, that this is a room full of people who challenge norms and stereotypes and body shaming and all the rest of it. So there may yet be a space for you on a main stage here. Do not give up hope. So that we do not give up hope also, I would like to welcome you to the stage for some opening comments.
You shouldn't let your children near your wiki page, clearly. So thank you very much for that warm introduction, and thanks everyone for coming along. And could I also acknowledge Janet for her welcome? And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the First Peoples and the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and particularly acknowledge the Wurundjeri and their close cousins, the Bunurong, and respects go to the fact that a continuously operating culture for over 60,000 years, the world's longest continuously operating culture, can teach us here at these next 2 days so much about what the issues around inclusion, diversity and the intersections between many of the different issues and creative and cultural activity will play. So it's actually the most appropriate thing to do when you think about the contribution that you'll all be making over the next 2 days about equity, inclusion, and the way to ensure that our cultural life, our practice, our activities, government's roles, organisations' roles, and what we do when we intersect with the community more broadly, that we reflect the diversity to ensure that the creativity of all people in Australia, of all peoples in Victoria, as we diversify both participants, audiences and support is really, really important. Because after all, it's the people in this room here today and those watching on live stream who are uniquely positioned to both lead those important conversations, but equally to give voice to those underrepresented voices and to bring to light the issues that we all need to engage with as a sector. It's the first time this symposium has been held, but of course it's not the first time that this conversation has been had. And we are very lucky to have organisations such as Arts Access, Multicultural Arts Victoria, Koorie Heritage Trust, Footscray Community Arts Centre, Regional Arts Victoria and many, many more who have long been champions and advocates of both equity and inclusion, participation and all that flows from that. So it's very good to see not just those organisations but the other partners in the event here today. 4 years ago, when we started the consultations around what is now the Creative State strategy, the feedback was very consistent. Both access to cultural experiences and to participation and employment within the creative industries is uneven and is inequitable. The direct intersections between that uneven and inequitable outcomes and the diversity of our community and the overlay of the injustices across both was pretty apparent and is still pretty apparent. To put it simply, this is really unacceptable from an equity point of view, from a public policy setting point of view, from a participation point of view, and for a future for the sector to be vibrant in a changing world point of view. Another important point that was made very loud and clear was that in order to create meaningful and really lasting change, dedicated, sustained investment and support was needed and had to happen. So we worked with the sector, with many of you here in the room, to co-design a series of initiatives that would help improve equity and inclusion in the creative sectors. This symposium is but one of the results of that process, and it is being led by the members for each of the three groups at the centre of this discussion here today. First Nations, culturally and linguistically diverse people and people with disability. This symposium provides a space for all peoples to meet, to hear both the practical tips and ideas, but importantly to strategise and to draw wealth from the experience of each other and from others that already exist both here in Victoria and through your links, Australia and the world. The next 2 days are that opportunity for a discussion, an opportunity to challenge, an opportunity to promote both new and, where they work, old ways of working, and to reflect on the ways that your organisations, and through that, the change that we can lead other organisations, the change of your practice, so the goals of becoming more equitable, more inclusive, and through that, ultimately stronger, because being able to represent the rich diversity of who we are as a community is the way in which we embed support for creativity and embed support for creative outcomes right across the Victorian and Australian community. This symposium is part of a broader Fair Play project. Beyond this particular event, the program will also see Diversity Arts Australia lend their experience to organisations and agencies that receive the multi-year support from Creative Victoria to help them build their capacity as champions of equity and inclusion. That's some 80 plus organisations, and with, of course, the changes that we've seen in recent years with the Australia Council, the demands of participation from those organisations grows and grows as resources get stretched more. So this is actually not just the right thing to do from an equity and inclusion point of view. There are some very strong practical economic and sustainability reasons why we should also be grabbing this opportunity. Through this process, Diversity Arts will work with organisations to both investigate the opportunities to enhance equity and inclusion, be that through leadership development, creative programming, staff support, marketing, and the crucial area of audience development. Based on their unique aims and objectives, all these organisations will be matched with mentors, including professional experts from First Nations, disability and cold communities. Together, they will work to support the process towards the transformative and substantial changes and sustainable changes that we need to see in participation. Very shortly, expressions of interest for the program will be open. In fact, they are open on the Diversity Arts Australia website. And initially 10 organisations will be selected to undertake this program in 2019 and a further 10 in 2020. Expressions of interest close on the 31st of March, and I encourage all eligible organisations to explore the leadership opportunity, submit their interest, and think about how you can leverage and add value to the kind of opportunities that you'll see over the next few days to inform how, why, and the kind of goals of participation in the program. So can I thank you for taking the time out of your no doubt busy schedules to be part of this symposium and through it, kicking off and sustaining the change program that we need for the cultural and creative sectors to be participative, to be stronger, to be inclusive, and to have equity and participation at the heart of what they do. We live in a country and a state that has and still is the home to the oldest continuously operating culture in the world. We are made up of people of so many different experiences, different abilities, and from all parts and all corners and cultures of the planet. It is incumbent on us all, therefore, to ensure that people from across all of these diverse communities not just have the opportunity for creative experiences, but at the heart of designing, participating and performing, and that we speak to those communities on terms through voices that are reflective of those communities. It falls to us all, right here and right now, to ensure that those voices are heard and that they are given every opportunity to share the stage, the page and the screen. And today is the chance to talk about where we want our creative sector to be in the times and years ahead and to create the roadmap to get there. I really do look forward to hearing about the ideas, the initiatives and the partnerships that start here and that go on to create the wave of change for the creative sector and through it, our society at large. And as I started by referring to the creative state policy from 2016-17, the truth is that we now are obliged under that policy and through the legislation that flowed from that to review that in a co-design way every 4 years, and that is next year. So the work that you are doing here and the work you would do through this program with 20 Victorian organisations, I'm really looking forward to providing us the outcomes, the policy space, and the success stories that we can then take those learnings and expand them in next year's review of the creative state policy. And we really do look forward to the work you're doing as driving that. So can I wish you every success, and thank you for your busy time, and good luck. Thanks.
Thank you so much to the Minister for making the time to be here today and to share such an inspiring insight into the thinking and preparation that is really underpinning the creative industries strategy here in Victoria. I think that so many of your words around understanding the vision, really analysing those antecedents of inequality, what that inequity of outcome means for our various communities that we are all a part of, is an incredibly present thought for so many of us to return to as we move through the program over the next 2 days. If you are not already filling in your EOI forms before the 31st of March, then surely we can help you with that before the end of these next 2 days. I have just a couple of minutes here now, actually only probably about one, but to let you know a little bit about who I am, and even to take a moment to breathe and get a bit grounded, because I feel a little loose and unsettled. But that is really the signifier of my life mostly these days. As the small p poet says up there, I am a writer and an editor and a current board member of Peril magazine, arguably Australia's oldest Asian Australian arts and culture magazine. I'm also the vice chair of the Stella Prize, which looks at women's writing and the nexus between language, gender and power. And all of that bio should simply tell you that I would much prefer to be alone in a room with a laptop. So it is very generous of Lena to say that she's delighted to have me here as an MC, because as the Oscars attest, this role is rapidly going to be made redundant. My role today is a little bit like a tram conductor, should you remember what those people did. I'm not exactly driving the tram, but I know the person who is, and I will shout out the stops and let you know the direction that we're going. And should you run into any difficulties or require change, then I will do my very best to help. If I had my way, and probably a little too early for the MC to go rogue on the program, I would not make you sit down statically in a room. I would make you take a mixed group of friends who you have never met and do a 2-day creative development, and then work backwards from the challenges that you meet as practitioners, as organisations, to try and iteratively design what it is we need to be able to make work that is the best quality, is the most reflective, is the most energised and hopefully sustainable for the context in which we find ourselves. The alternative is the next best thing, which is to find a number of people who have already done that same process in their own contexts, with their own communities, and they have generously agreed to share that insight in the hope that we might be able to work backwards and find, is it one more toolkit, or is it some other kind of knowledge or way of being that will help us collectively dream the culture forward? What I can model today as an MC is essentially reading people's names and letting you know where the program is going, but I can also model the inevitable, which has already happened, and namely that I will make a mistake. And I may in fact make several. I may make some mistakes of error, some mistakes of timetabling, forgetting to acknowledge where the toilets are, but I will more importantly make mistakes that in some way reinforce or reiterate the bias or inequality that we have in fact come here to address. So if I make that mistake, I pronounce your name incorrectly, or I forget to provide accessibility requirements that are necessary, or I somehow, in concept, in word or in deed, do something that offends you, just call it out. And what I'll model is that I won't be fragile or precious about it. I'll say sorry, acknowledge what happened, ask what I can do to make it better, and then try in my behaviour to remediate the situation. And your generosity will not be about you owing me an education, but about you being the better person and me having the benefit of the doubt that I'm willing to learn. And in some senses, it could be a mechanism by which we think about how we might develop the kinds of relationships that will enable us to have the sort of frank and fearless and hopefully exciting conversation that will be a part of the next 2 days. I need to make a few housekeeping notes. I know that some folks are just joining us right now, and you will, with the assistance of our ushers, find a range of, what am I going to call them, structural tchotchkes to assist you in the day. So you might find a pronoun sticker, a name badge. They will assist you with access to the bathrooms, to the meals, the lunches, all of this kind of seating stuff. Please look for a person in a black t-shirt, very hard to find often in Melbourne, and they will help make that possible. The schedule is very packed, and as such, there will be times when you might want to leave the room, find a breakout space, just take time to attend to work, call your child's childcare, or any of the other things that are necessary. And I think that if we allow each other to self-guide through the space, it will be helpful for each of us as individuals and keep the program moving. We have a range of technologies designed to assist us. I won't overwhelm us with the arts front and the hashtag and the Twitter and the live stream, but throughout the day we'll mention them. And if you really want to distinguish the digital natives from the chaff, you can get on the front foot and start posting to the arts front group already. Norm and Elliot will be delighted to field your inquiries. We have 2 Auslan interpreters today, Michelle Ashley and Susan Emerson from stage left. Please welcome them. And at the end of the day, there will be an opportunity for some debriefs, because we certainly know that there isn't enough space for all of the voices here to be heard on this particular platform up here on the stage. But that doesn't mean that your voices are not valued by us, and that multi-layered conversation, whether it's through Arts Front, whether it's through the social media legacy, whether it's in video or film documentation, whether it's participating in a formal research survey, or having a one-on-one conversation in a breakout room, these are all ways that you have an opportunity to participate in ways that suit you throughout the day. Now, that is more than enough from me. I feel a tiny bit less like a limp rag, but very tiny. The other mistake that may be made is if you notice food on my front, just let it ride. I've tried very hard to wear a distracting top, but I just noticed some more cereal as I was out in the back room. I have the great honour now of introducing our keynote speaker, who is Genevieve Greaves, a Warramai woman from Southeast Australia, an award-winning artist, curator and content creator, committed to sharing First Peoples' histories and cultures and interrogating colonising frameworks and practices. Because she is modest, she has asked me not to read her entire and undoubtedly impressive biography. But I would say, as a gesture of thank you, that I took my daughter to the Melbourne Museum recently and walked through the exceptional exhibits there. Your touch and your internationally celebrated insight have shaped those into a place that I think recognises vibrancy and challenge and resistance and struggle. It is one of the most beautiful and also poignant places to recognise what it means to be and live in this state. So thank you for your hand in that. And please may I welcome you to the stage to deliver our keynote.
I have to start by continuing that modesty and say I was just one hand in many who created that incredible exhibition. There's a huge team of people, over 40 in the museum, and then so many contributions from communities across the state and across the country to create an exhibition like that. It was a huge collaboration, and collaboration is so key to what we're talking about today. So yeah, I'm going to talk at you too, sorry. It would be nice if you could get up and do other things, but I'll try to keep it succinct, and hopefully what I say is useful for you moving forward. You have to bear with me, I'm dealing with the end of a cold, and I've got a teething baby, and if anyone's had a teething baby, you know you don't sleep very much, so just bear with me today. Before I begin, I want to acknowledge the country that we're on today, the lands of the Boonwurrung and the Wurundjeri people, and I want to thank Janet for her welcome on behalf of Ngaruit Carolyn Briggs, who's dealing with some sorry business at the moment. So thank you, Janet. I'm a visitor to this country. I'm not from here, but I've called it home for very many years now, more than 20 years. And I feel very fortunate to live here because I have many teachers from this place and I've had many experiences that have made me who I am. I've also made Victoria my home because it is a place of innovation where real social change is possible. It says something about Victoria that First Peoples exhibition is here and not in other states. And that comes from a real history of advocacy and resistance on behalf of the First Peoples of this state. And I think that potential for real social change is evident in this gathering here today, and that's why I'm so pleased to be here and really honoured to be giving this keynote to you. So I'm here as a First Nations woman, a Worimi woman from New South Wales, to speak from my perspective about diversity and fair play in the creative industries. I've titled this keynote First Peoples First, as this is a statement that we hear more and more in the arts and culture sector in Australia, and I think one we need to unpack a little bit. At one level, this statement refers to the fact that we've been here for some 80,000 years, some extensive period of time, but it's now also emblematic of a cultural shift that's taking place, a movement that aims to acknowledge our shared history and work towards dealing with the unfinished business of invasion. But I'm conscious, though, when we speak of diversity and inclusion in this context where I'm standing today and in this room, that we're not just speaking about First Peoples. Our disability and culturally and linguistically diverse communities also very much need to be a part of this conversation. And our issues are not the same, but we do share an exclusion from what would be considered the mainstream. And personally, in terms of my own story, I was a carer for many years for my brother, who is an artist with intellectual disability, an amazing drag queen who does shows about racism. And I'm very conscious of the devaluing of people with disabilities in this society and how rarely we hear from people with different abilities. I'm also the partner of a woman from a culturally diverse background, so I'm aware of some of the complexities of this experience in Australia, such as the tensions between maintaining and connecting to the culture of your family while being prey to the acceptance or not of Australian society. I cannot speak to these spaces because they are not my own, but I do acknowledge our shared experiences of marginalisation and our collective need for change. So our experience, First Peoples' experience, since 1770 has been framed by colonisation. So colonisation is a structure, it's not an event. It didn't happen in 1770 and end there. Its impacts don't just exist in the past, they continue into the present. We remain a colonised country. And the process of colonisation, to put it simply, is one of destruction, eradication, and then forgetting. For many years, First Peoples were made invisible and ignored by the nation state and many of its occupants. There's a very famous statement made in 1968 by a man called W.E.H. Stenner, I don't know what that stands for, who called it the Great Australian Silence, a deliberate attempt to forget that this country was occupied at the time of invasion and that violence was enacted on people in order to occupy it. In the 1970s, revisionist historians worked hard to bring these narratives to light, supporting Indigenous people from across the country who demanded that our voices be heard and our truths be told. And if anyone here has read the Uluru Statement from the Heart, with calls for a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, you will know that demand has not been met, and this is still being called for today. There is a greater acknowledgement of our past and present in this country, but there are still many who do not know or do not want to know their own past. This occurs in an individual and a collective sense. Since the 1970s, many narratives have come forth: the stolen generations, frontier violence, domestic servitude, stolen wages, but they have been rejected and continue to be rejected by many. And that's not just those in power who want to create a positive, whitewashed national identity free of the stains of the past, but also average people. I worked recently on a film project for the Melbourne Museum sharing stories of colonial violence across the state of Victoria. It's called Black Days, Sunrises, Blood Runs, and you can see it in the exhibition. Each story of violence, all of which occurred in the 19th century, was shared by a contemporary person. Most of our storytellers on this project are Indigenous, but we had one non-Indigenous woman who was willing to stand up and share these histories. For most of these storytellers, all located in regional Victoria, it wasn't an easy decision to stand up and tell these stories. They did this despite the potential risk to them and their families. A backlash was expected. All these people were doing was sharing stories of massacres and violence that occurred some time ago, but somehow this could be viewed as a threat to their communities. And by that I mean their broader communities. We cannot underestimate the strength of denialism in this country. It operates at a meta level in our institutions and our leadership, but it is also embodied by our citizens who are taught to reject the truths of our history. I recently taught a student who told me that she was struggling to fight against the voice in her head that was pushing against what she was learning in our class. Sadly, this is a state of being that really characterises what it is to be an Australian. Another strong belief aligned with this thinking is that Australia is a white country. You could be forgiven for thinking that it is when you look at our power structures, the federal government or the High Court bench or our university chancellors. The whiteness is blinding, but the idea of a white nation is completely false. Firstly, this country was diverse at the time of invasion in 1770. There were 250 nations. We are all now placed under the terms Aboriginal or Indigenous, presenting a homogeneity that does not reflect who we are. Not only are we culturally diverse, our experiences of colonisation are so different across the continent. Here in the southeast, we experienced invasion very early on. In parts of the centre, First Peoples did not meet settlers until the 1980s. Secondly, our population has been diverse since invasion. Just one example, the makeup of the First Fleet was not just English people. There were Scottish and Irish and Welsh, there were Jewish and there were black people on the First Fleet. Our nation has always been a place of many cultures, and we need to reflect this diversity simply because it is the reality of who we are. Our sector is a key space of representation. We create representations that communicate who we are as people, as communities, as a country. We create a sense of belonging and identity, individually and collectively. It is our responsibility to tell our stories, share our knowledge, imagine our future, provide spaces to connect, to laugh, to cry, to rage, to change. And it is crucial that these myriad representations created by us reflect who we actually are and not a false sense of ourselves. And that's really why we're here today, to speak about the deep disparities that still exist. As representation is also about power, not just the power to create, to have a stage, to have your story heard. It is also the power of decision making. Who is at the table? Who is on the board? Where does real power lie and who is wielding it? I want to take this a step further and argue that it is not enough to include diverse people in current decision making structures. These structures themselves need to be examined. What are the cultural foundations of these structures and how do they need to be reimagined to provide systemic change? These are not easy questions to answer, particularly if you're in the early stages of your awakening and attempts to right these wrongs. There are no easy solutions or quick fixes in this space of restoration and justice. Real change requires critical conversations, a sense of uncomfortability. That's when you know you're really onto something, if you're feeling uncomfortable. And what the theorist Claire Land calls, in her excellent book, Decolonising Solidarity, which I recommend, a reckoning with complicity. How have you benefited from the invasion of these lands, and what are you willing to give up to atone for this? For many people, First Peoples First has come to stand for practical action, engaging elders to do welcomes, programming more Indigenous art, hiring an Indigenous actor for a mainstream role, or ensuring narratives of shared history are included. And all of these actions are positive and making a real contribution to social change. However, at the heart of this movement is a moral imperative. not for surface or tokenistic action, but for a deep reckoning with the injustice that it characterises our nation. It is a collective endeavour, but it is also an individual journey. How do you acknowledge that this sovereign land was never ceded? How do you remember and acknowledge the violence that occurred in this place, in this country? One of my favourite theorists, Deborah Bird-Rose, states, "To write as if the suffering of those who were harmed never mattered would be to perpetuate violence in the present." This violence, still largely unrecognised, continues in many forms and is not just enacted against us, it is enacted against others who are marginalised and excluded from this society, and it is also enacted against country, leading us to the current crisis we face in the spectre of climate change. If First Peoples were really put first in Australia, if the unfinished business of the nation was finally reckoned with, it would transform our society into a space that is almost hard to envision in the present day. It would be a place where our voices, our knowledge and our cultures would be valued and heard. Our country could be healed. It's not just about people, but it's also about land. There is hope inherent in the statement, First Peoples First, that real change is possible, that future generations will not face the same oppression that has gone before them. It is a change that I hope you will all embrace. Thank you.
Genevieve, thank you. Thank you so much for your words. There is a lot to open up in that conversation, so if you need a bit of time to grab some water. And I have several questions that I would love to ask, but you have generously asked that we open the conversation first to the floor. Acknowledging that there are so many here who have already got insight into, I suppose, that transformative reckoning that you're really talking about. We would love to welcome you to ask questions of Genevieve, whether it's from your practice area or, I suppose, trying to get some more detail on some of the initiatives that you're really flagging there. Can I ask our Wheeler Centre folk with the microphones to make themselves known? And if you do have a question that you would like to kick us off, then please pop your hand or some other item in the air. Otherwise, the deathly silence will be me.
You can ask a question.
Well, there is a question. I don't want it to be just me because I'm already sick of the sound of my own voice.
So I can't hear you.
Oh, hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name's Samsara. Thank you for that speech. I was interested in when you said that it is our responsibility to tell our stories and make our spaces and etc. etc. I was just wondering with how that fits in with the older perspective of where artists, I guess, you know, particularly I'm speaking about able white male people, like, you know, to tell stories for the people who can't, which was a worthy cause. But how does that fit in now with kind of this new version of how we all see ourselves?
Yeah, thanks for raising that. And it's a very problematic model, isn't it, for people to take other people's stories and present them. And the model I'm interested in is that collaborative, intercultural model where, you know, as an artist or curator, I see myself as a facilitator to work with people or to work with my own story or however I want to do it in a respectful and collaborative way. And that requires relationships. So relationships that ideally are ongoing, that span some time and aren't just relationships based on a singular project where you like, oh, I actually need an Aboriginal voice in this project or some other voice and you're seeking someone out to fill a gap. Ideally, they're projects or that have come from communities that communities want, that actually focus on the needs of communities. So they come from communities, and you as a non-Indigenous artist facilitator, if that's who you are, work with those communities to realise what they want to share and what they want to tell. And that, as I said, takes time, and it takes relationships, and it takes trust, and a lot of false starts and mistakes. But that's the model that I think is a much better model for us moving into the future, rather than people trying to tell each other's stories from afar.
At the back. If you'd like, you could also introduce yourself, just so that we might be a little more person-to-person connected.
Hi, I'm Andy Butler. I'm a writer, curator and artist, lapsed arts worker. It was really great what you were saying, Genevieve. I think there was one interesting point that you mentioned, that it's not only about the people who are at the decision-making table, but the processes of making those decisions that need to change.
Yeah.
I think that was really insightful. There's, I guess having worked in the sector and being that person who's been at the decision-making table, and then realising that the processes are maybe antagonistic to any real change is a real issue. But just wondering how you envision those decision-making processes changing.
Yeah, with a lot of work. So I've had the same experience. You know, I've sat on boards and found the whole process really constrictive and not, and I haven't really been able to necessarily have a voice or represent our perspective or really make any real changes to the organisation I'm meant to be participating in, because it's a very colonial structure. The governance model of a lot of organisations, I know people who try and subvert it and set up advisory committees, and you know there are different models emerging, but I would like to see that happen so much more, because I think even in Aboriginal organisations we often have those colonising governance structures, which is just not how we should be operating, and it really undermines our culture and undermines our own value systems and our knowledge systems. So it's extremely colonising and perpetuates that. Yeah. So yeah, I'd love to see what you do and other people do to decolonise and deconstruct the governance structures to, not just have a couple of diverse people at the table, but really look at how organisations are run and how they operate. And I think there are a lot of exciting things happening around the country with people trying to meet this challenge, but we need to do more work in this space.
Just here at the stage left, stage right.
My name is John Kasab, I'm a filmmaker. What do you think is the ideal model, if not the board? Like, what have you seen that's worked really well that you'd like to see more of?
Well, at the museum, we had a model for our exhibition, which was ended up being called Yulange. So we invited, this was myself and Caroline Martin and Vicky Cousins, and we're building an exhibition that was meant to have community voice and meant to be in partnership with community. And we had a steering committee at the museum, which is a very effective steering committee, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee, but they meet 4 times a year for 3 hours. 4 hours. And when I got there, I sort of said, so who's my steering committee? And they said, you can use ACAC. And I said, so how much time will I have with ACAC? And they said, you can have half an hour each meeting. And that's like 2 hours a year. And I was like, we can't build an exhibition with 2 hours a year of cultural guidance, from elders. So we, and it took a lot of work, like a lot of advocacy within the museum, a lot of pushing by all of us to get the museum to a point where they would allow us to build the model that we needed to create this exhibition that is so celebrated, and it's so celebrated because of the community engagement at its heart. But what we did was we had 16 people who were respected elders and community members from across the state who all brought different things and who loosely represented regions, but not even, And we made time for cultural business. So we met for a week at a time, every 6 weeks. It was a huge, expensive undertaking. The museum had to invest a lot of money in that. And when I got there, I think their community engagement budget was $8,000. And by the end, we'd spent a lot more than that. But I've been on many big projects where the community engagement budget is $8,000, like huge national projects, and it's like $8,000. Okay, what are you going to do with that? Seriously. But and we built relationships. We brought this group together, and it was the most extraordinary experience for all of us. You know, there was a real respect between the museum and the community, represented by this group who named themselves Yulunj, the Law and Knowledge Holders. And the exhibition, the success is down to them because it's their stories. They created all the frameworks, the welcome. You know, when we said we want to do a creation story, they said, and we wanted to do, well, we didn't know. We thought we had to do creation stories from across the state. They said, no, do Bunjil. This is the country of Bunjil, do Bunjil. But we want him in a nest made out of real wood. And we're like, oh, how are we ever going to do that? But, people were so committed to this group of elders that the museum staff, they did everything they could to meet every desire they had. And we have this beautiful creation cinema now. So it's a long answer, sorry. But that's a model. And now we've continued Yulunj into the future, but we're still working out what it looks like. We don't exactly know. And when we started Yulunj, we didn't actually know what that model looked like either. We didn't really know what we were doing. We just tried something new. And for that project, that worked really well. So it's about probably taking risks, trying new things. I don't know what the absolute model is because every situation is different and it really needs to be contextual to place, to people, to the organisation. So you can't sort of say there is an ultimate model that's going to work for everybody. It's something that you've got to build from the ground up with a lot of conversations and a lot of listening and actually working out what's required and what's needed and really be responsive to that, listen in a way where you're making real change, not paying lip service to it. Yeah, sorry, long answer.
Even if it is a long answer, I actually have a further question to that because I think in some ways what you're describing is a shift in institutional power. And whenever we ask institutions to shift power, there's often a moment of cognitive dissonance. Do you mean like, what? Yeah. What do you mean I don't share power? What do you mean I'm not connected to the community? Like, I have this subcommittee.
Yeah.
And in that moment of cognitive dissonance, most people and many organisations shut down. What is it that enabled those power holders to take that risk with you? Was it relationships?
It was a battle.
Can you tell us a bit about
that? It's different everywhere in every situation, but that particular situation was a battle. So it was two opposing sides, us on one side, and we were strong because we were together, and there was more than one of us as well fighting, and the museum at that stage on the other side. And not all of the museum, many good people in the museum, real willingness and desire. It's in fact a very different place now, but at that point in time, it was a battle. This is the way we do things. We're not doing that. No, that's too much money. It's not worth it. Da, da, da. So we had to fight, and it took years. It didn't happen overnight, and also leverage. That's utilising leverage. At that point in time, the museum had a huge budget. They had to build this exhibition, and if they didn't have people to build it, they'd be in trouble. So they had to work with us. So there are opportunities sometimes. There are openings. If we tried to make that change when we didn't have a big exhibition project that had to be developed, they probably wouldn't have listened at all. But there was a need for engagement. So, and at that point, we're able to create some structural change that just seemed like it happened for a moment and with an exhibition and maybe then disappeared. But in fact, that structural change is happening now, I think, from that moment in time. I was very disheartened after the opening of First Peoples because I felt like we'd shifted all this ground and then we had to walk away and, because I was an ongoing staff member at that point. And a friend said to me, you throw the rock into the water and the ripples take some time to reach the edge. We've made an inroad and it'll take some time for that change to be felt. And it did, but now we have a CEO who is putting First Peoples first in our organisation. So has created a whole First Peoples department led by First Peoples. And that's a huge shift from what was happening when we built the exhibition. So I'm not saying the exhibition created all of that, but I think it helped create a cultural shift to what we have now. So, that's a 8-year story. These changes don't happen quickly, they happen over time. And we were just a moment in time at the museum because there's a whole lot of other people who've been, members of the Victorian community who've been working or fighting that museum for a long time to create structural change. So we were just one moment, and all the work that they'd done had helped create that opportunity, and then we had this moment in time and a changing society that allowed for something different to happen. Yeah.
A question here at the front.
Hi, I'm Caroline Bowditch from Arts Access Victoria.
Hello.
Thanks for all your brilliant acknowledgements at the beginning of your keynote. One of the things that I'm really conscious of coming back to Australia after being away for so long is that when we talk about diversity, we often talk about it in these silos in terms of we're talking about First Nations people or disability or cold communities. And I'm really interested in how do we get better at the intersections? Is that something we're interested in, or does that water it down? Like, I was really interested to hear you talk about decolonisation of solidarity. How do we,
That's such an interesting question. And I'm only on the edge of that thinking, really. I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. Because I think, I think that we have... there are connections. And like my brother, for instance, is an Aboriginal, disabled, gay man, and a drag queen and performer and incredible. He is an intersection, and even, his identity is so fluid. And you're right, the way we silo things is not necessarily useful. I guess it's just a way we talk, manage information at this point. And I was even struggling in writing this keynote. I had to really think through it, but didn't have enough time to think deeply enough to really answer your question in a deep way. But I do agree that there could be, I think through the idea of decolonisation, there could be a way that we start to talk about more of the connections between us in terms of our experiences. But I think, we also have to be so careful to acknowledge that we are different as well. But we are different as well as First Peoples. Like, that's the thing, it's so diverse. But I was really conscious of not speaking for anyone, and that's because I'm conscious of that. But I do have some little understanding. Yeah, sorry, I'm just going on a bit now. You can tell I'm tired.
Not at all. Caroline, it is really, it's such a resonant question for a gathering like this that brings multiple silos into the room together. And I literally have the words, reject long-standing silos and homogeneity of disadvantage, underneath which is, how do we balance that with specific needs? And that's a real tension, which I don't think that Genevieve, you or any individual here is responsible for knowing the answer, but I just even wanted to draw back to your comments around context, that if we treat the place, the country, the people, the time, the structures, the infrastructure, and all of those things as something that is specific and relevant, then actually we kind of get halfway there, because then you see a person who is a drag queen and a gay man and Aboriginal and a performer and has a disability, because you're looking at a whole person, not because you're wanting to get as many of those tick boxes checked off for your demographic reporting, which is a really subtle tilt, but so meaningful for me at least. But maybe that's the big picture question for us all for the next 2 days. Can I welcome any more comments from the floor? And perhaps I would love to call on those in other industries or other sectors that are perhaps not Indigenous-led, and see if you have some insights into ways that your organisation has perhaps considered some of the transformative power structures that Genevieve has flagged in the museum sector, which I think would be relatively rare, but I would love to hear from the room. Thank you.
Oh, hi. My name is Nilmini Fernando, and I'm actually sort of working at the artist, academic, activist link. And I'm actually been doing a lot of work in the family violence sector, and I am dealing with wanting to save intersectionality from the system and what you're talking about, Caroline. And it seems to be like I'm going through this process at the moment where I'm being, somebody in the top gets the job to do intersectionality and mainstream it. then all the sort of NGOs and all the people around the edges get invited in. We share our ideas, but we don't have the power to do it differently. So so I can see how that happens from structural, and the arts is not considered healing in any way. And I think even if it's not actually performed or exhibited, the arts need to be part of people's healing, telling their stories and people's healing. And I often find that the stories are detached from the body of the person telling it. So the sort of ideas I try and work with is to get the embodied storytelling and try and make a platform for many voices. But those kind of projects don't get the funding because we are siloed. You know, for example, I'm in Darebin, and Darebin Council has an intercultural department and a building and everything. Then I approach the gender equity person to try and get through that hoop. That gender equity person is a white feminist, who then I have to justify that I'm not a white feminist, I come from a black and brown. So all the different hoops you have to get through, and the siloing, in fact, is the methodology. That is what's colonising us. And I think the division of identities, we're following what the state decides is intersectionality. There's only one story that we have to follow. And I find that if you're in a smaller organisation, or if you're desperate for a job or trying to survive, saying the wrong thing can be very dangerous to the organisation, can be dangerous for yourself. I can see how in the arts the same sort of structures get in the way of people, and that the major discourse, we are following the master discourse of what anti-racism is, what intersectionality is. I don't know if I've gone off topic, but I can really speak to that, and the importance of having people who have survived mental health. All of them come together in family violence, and I think having the opportunity to tell stories, their own stories, needs to be a major consideration in arts access for people.
Yeah, there's so many interesting points in what you've said, and the only thing I would add to it is that at times we do require our own spaces as well. That's just the other thing to consider. Our own spaces in order to maintain ourselves and to strengthen our culture and our identity and our voice. And that's what the Koorie Heritage Trust was for me many years ago, and many people, was a embodiment of our values, and our cultural frameworks that strengthen them. So it's difficult because we do need that, but you're absolutely right in terms of the difficulty of navigating systems, and because our projects don't fit under any banner. I was on the board of Bamira, the possum skin cloak makers, for a couple of years, and it's a southeastern practice. But there's no southeastern governance space. That's South Australia, Victoria and New South Wales. There's no way to envision possum skin cloak making across our cultural region, because that cultural region doesn't exist except in our minds and in our cultures. So there's, it's so difficult in so many ways to navigate those spaces. And the issue really is that we're under-resourced. That's the other issue to do this work, which is so incredibly important, because arts, as you say, aren't deeply understood in terms of the power of what we do, in terms of the healing work, in terms of the connections we create between communities, and strengthening people's identity and voice. And just watching my brother go through that process of making his show, which was very difficult because I helped him with it, but from not feeling valued and not feeling like he had anything to say, to being heard and celebrated on the stage, was such an incredible transformation in this one person, through having that opportunity through Footscray Community Arts Centre to make that show. So it needs to be more broadly understood.
Here in the front. Just wave your hand up a bit more so the microphone can...
Veronica Pardo from Multicultural Arts Victoria. My question is about whether you think that a human rights frame potentially adds meat to the bones of that intersectional conversation, whether that's something that unites us. It's certainly a conversation that I think needs to be had much more powerfully in this country, and whether you have used human rights frameworks to further your advocacy in the particular space that you're referring to this morning.
I might have done it without really realising that I have. The frameworks I'm really working with at the moment are decolonising and intercultural frameworks, but I'm sure they're useful. I don't even know how we really begin to dismantle all of the stuff around us at this point, in terms of really shifting, decolonising power structures. So I think any tools that are useful, use them, definitely,
I think I saw a couple of hands go up, one at the very back and then one here kind of in the middle.
Hi, it's Martin Payton from Footscray Community Arts Centre, and you mentioned Footscray Community Arts Centre Genevieve, and I thought I would refer to the way in which Footscray Community Arts Centre has been able to be guided by an Indigenous advisory group and have elders in residence. But particularly the work that you started with the training of working in First Nations cultural context, I think has been, particularly from my brief experience in the last year and seeing the impact that's had on organisations that take that on. I thought it'd be great for you to expand on that if you could a little bit.
Thank you. Because Footscray Arts Centre's had 2 elders in residence for some time now. I can't remember how long, but it must be several years. So Auntie Carolyn Briggs and Uncle Larry Walsh, who are employed by Footscray Arts Centre to be present, to guide staff, to guide projects, to provide advice. And Uncle Larry particularly is a fixture at Footscray Arts Centre. If anyone goes there, you'll see Uncle Larry. And he's so proud of Footscray and gives so much to that space because he really believes in it. But I was also a member of the Indigenous Advisory Committee for some years. We always wanted a better name than that, but we never got that far. But and we've been sort of, as Footscray's given us the space to have the conversations that we need to have about what we want Footscray to do as an arts centre and who it should be for and who we're connecting with. And those conversations are ongoing. They're not all resolved, but Footscray allows us the space just to work out what we want to do. And for instance, there's been a big concert for many years called Womanjaka, and the council want it to be a certain way and a big sort of event that draws in a lot of the community, and a lot of our elders were like, no, we actually don't want that. We really want something that's grassroots and about us. And that's been a big shift and a difficult shift and difficult conversations with a key funding body as well. But that's something that, if you're going to set up these groups, you actually have to listen to what people have to say, as difficult as that may be, and as much as it may not align with your frameworks. But I've also been teaching there, and now Paola Balla is running that course. And the key things we look at in that course are decolonising intercultural frameworks, but also racial literacy and whiteness. And my friends Odette Collada and Diane Jones teach that course. And racial literacy is an extraordinary tool for just understanding how to talk about race, which of course doesn't exist, and to look at implicit bias and to have those conversations, but also to be able to position yourself. And that's, I was sort of talking about this being a collective journey that we need to work together, but it's also an individual journey of placing yourself, of understanding your own story, of how you came to be here. Those rich, complex stories of our belonging or not belonging to place. So, I really enjoy doing that work, but I'll tell you what, there's always tears. It's not easy work to do. It's, interrogating your own position and really shifting your perspective can be hard work. And so I'm grateful to the people who make that commitment to making those changes. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you. Just at the back of the room here on this side.
Hi, I just want to actually share some thoughts. I come from northwest China, where a lot, where I came from, we have a lot of ethnic groups. In fact, probably more than 40 of them all living together for hundreds of years. And I actually, in the last few years, whenever I went back and I see how the ethnic groups living together in harmony, I would just sometimes make me think, like why they are happy together, not like everywhere in China, but there will be other extreme places that we do have problems. But in that area, my hometown, it was like that. You have I always tell people a good story about we have the best food market, night market. And then you would have someone selling pork, like a store, and right next to it, 10 centimeters, is a Muslim store sell lamb. And they talk to each other, eat together, and they're just really, they don't see there's any problem. They respect each other. And those kind of image, because when I was there, I was really used to it. But then I was away and I went back, I realized that it's actually a really wonderful form. And it makes me think why in other places, people couldn't do it. For example, in Australia, I always think, we talk of first people first. And I would just say, sometimes I think maybe the best thing is when everybody's the same. So the first people and everyone else, they're exactly the same. And so they feel comfortable. They don't even, that's probably the time when this stopped being an issue. And I really understand how people have to push this now because it hasn't been addressed enough at all in the last couple hundred years. But I think, from just share my thoughts, it's I think probably the best form is a one day when everybody is the same, no matter if you're disabled or if you from also different cultural background or no matter what your sexuality, if that's all doesn't matter, that would probably be the best scenario.
I've been learning a little bit about China because I teach at University of Melbourne and I have a lot of Chinese students who come to my Working in Indigenous Cultural Context course. And I was really, at first I was like, oh wow, I don't know anything about China. And my course is, the tools are broad and can be applied broadly but are really specific to Australia. The context is really Australian. So I remember teaching, it was a 4-day intensive, and by the end of it I was like, I don't know if anyone's understood anything I've said. And there's also, a language barrier. Some people's language was better than others and we don't have translators and, we should, to make sure the course is accessible. But I've learnt a little bit about China and about the ethnic groups, and I think when some of these students had gone through the course, it really opened their eyes to things in China and maybe things that they hadn't seen in terms of the inequality that exists for many ethnic groups, and I'm sure it's different in different parts of China. But in terms of all of us being the same, we are different, and we're different in the sense that there is deep inequality. And so we're not all at the same level, but we also have different cultures and different ways of doing things. And if we're all the same, we'd sort of lose that beauty of who we are. So, but I understand what you're saying in terms of things should be equal and there should be equal access to resources and not the discrimination that exists. So thank you for that.
Genevieve, I think that we may be reaching near the end of our allotted time, but you have, in just that brief kind of half hour with us, opened up so many topics that I know will be revisited in the next few days. That sense of what structural colonialism and power do to configure the relationships and the ways that we make art and engage with communities. Revisiting, I guess, that real moral imperative to acknowledge and kind of refute that collective denialism. And then to try and say, what is it that would need to change specific to that context and how would we do it? It's not an easy packaged answer of here,
No.
do it today and this is what it looks like, but it's been wonderful to have just a few insights into your practice and the impact that that is having, particularly in the museum and Indigenous sectors. May I please ask the room to welcome you and thank you again graciously for this time. I deeply appreciate it. I miscued the clap and then you all moved, but I'm going to re-cue it again. Let's go. I'm going to move over to the lectern, which I find awkward because as a Filipino Catholic, I feel like any time you stand in front of one of those things, I'm like, sus. I is sus on you right now. But I find those microphones really woofy and kind of creepy, and I feel squatty. So that's just me. It's good for you to know where I'm at all points in time, isn't it? We have now just a few minutes to kind of regroup, do a bit of a refresher, and also to introduce some key participants who are going to act today as citizen journalists in the course of today's proceedings. Now, show of hands or a nod or whatever it might be, but have you been in a forum where there are citizen journalists before, and are people relatively familiar with the term and the practice? Some yes, some no. Yeah? Claire G. Coleman, do you want to say anything on behalf of that collective, or are you happy if I introduce you? Yes, excellent. This is not in my notes, but it's okay. Look, let me start by introducing the people that we have with us to undertake those roles, and their experiences and their insights might give you a little bit of a sense of where they might be taking that role. So we have Claire G. Coleman, a Noongar woman whose family have belonged to the south coast of Western Australia since long before history started being recorded. If you have not already obtained her first novel, Terra Nullius, which was shortlisted for the Stella Prize, I commend you to take your time in the break, tootle around to the Readings bookstore and pick one up. Her second novel, The Old Lie, is coming out very soon. Anticipate it eagerly. Magan Magan is a writer and author of From Grains to Gold. His work has been published by Hyde magazine and other literary journals, whether it's Offset, Cordite, the Suburban Review, several anthologies, including Australian poetry, and he is a co-editor of the impending anthology Growing Up African in Australia. Magan, could you give a wave of where you are located? Yay? Oh, claps for all. I'm terrible at cueing the claps, like I have to say. I was like, for someone who does perform, I'm surprisingly unmotivated by claps in that I find them stressful. But if anyone would also like to applaud for Claire G. Coleman, I would appreciate that too. Jessica Walton is front and centre. Please make yourself known to the crew. And Jessica is a writer, parent and secondary teacher. She's the author of Introducing Teddy and has completed a writability fellowship with Writers Victoria, focusing on poetry about disability, cancer and pain. For those of you who tune in to Get Cracking, you may have seen the benefits of her skills in a recent episode of that fabulous show, and will be featured in the Meet Me at the Intersection Own Voices anthology, which has already come out. I've got a copy of that. There you go. Pollyanna, where are you? There you go. Pollyanna, am I pronouncing the R correctly? Yeah. I feel like it's got to kind of lean in with the Pollyanna. Requires a saunter. Pollyanna spent the first 15 years of her life illiterate due to severe dyslexia. At the age 16, she started taking photos of all of the wonderful, beautiful and complicated things she noticed in everyday life that she could not write about. Passionate about empowering people and regenerating places through art and activism, she has found strength in linking ideas, connecting people and facilitating community arts in regional areas. She works as a facilitator, collaborator, mentor and leader, here to empower minorities, young entrepreneurs and artists to achieve their wildest dreams. Please welcome her. Now, the Citizen Journalists Act, I guess in a way, that's almost a bit of a proxy for what we're asking you to do in this next little session, which is that they will take time to reflect on where they have come from, what insights they seek to gain, and how they want to respond and interact with the next 2 days' events, but they'll do the extra work and then share them with us. They might take to Twitter, you might see them on the Facebook live feed, they might just want to talk to you face to face. They may take time later to reflect, do a personal journal, take some sort of wild, scatological, deconstructive beat poem to it. One can only dream. And or they may wish to provide a more straight up and down response and a critical engagement with some of the issues that are at play here. But their freedom to respond in a range of different ways is the same freedom that you all possess. I have been asked to give you a little bit of time to reflect on your intentions for this 2-day symposium. I believe the folks from Wheeler Centre will hand out a card and bits of paper if you are a texty, writey kind of type of person and you don't have that equipment. So please, make yourself available, cast the cards amongst the many. But alternatively, you may wish to do that privately in your own head, or you have brought yourself some kind of documenting technology. In doing so, should you wish to avail yourself of sharing these things, you can always use the Twitter hashtags and handles, or you may have registered previously for ArtsFront. Can I get a show of hands? I think you had to do it as a part of your registration, but has everyone had a chance to see the platform? Yeah? And have folks used them before? It is, in a sense, I guess, like a private social media space. Instead of, if you don't want to post these things to Facebook, it's a chance to share it with the group. You may take a photo, you might have a scribble or a jotting, or, Margaret, you may also, oh look, so many options to participate. Margaret is offering her pink box for feedback, in which she would like you to insert your thoughts, which that's a good thing to put in a pink box, don't you think? Now, these are a reflective survey, and they're a way of kind of responding back in text to communicate with us, the organisers and the researchers, about things like what made the session interesting for you, what could have been done to make it better, what insights have you gained, and did you meet or connect with any people? So do you mean it's like a bit of a touch point of like what, who, how, why? You could take a photo of this and keep the bit of paper if it's really important to have that. You could give us the piece of paper if you would prefer to put it into the mix. But in essence, I am saying there are a lot of different ways, technologically, interpersonally, through proxies and kind of intentional writers in residence and citizen journalists. You could pass your messages to them. There are a lot of ways to do it. But what would you be doing? The questions that I have to ask you, I already don't like, which is fine. You can think about why you're here and what you hope your organisation will get from this experience. But I would also love if we thought for a moment about what it is we might give. We're always asked to reflect of what we might get. What can I take? What can I learn? What will I be shown to do? But what can we give is a really different dialogue. It says to you that I believe you have gifts in abundance, that you have talents, that you have insights, that you have frameworks and processes and insights and experiences that we can all learn from, and that your generosity to give those things is a readiness to meet people in the middle. I'm going to let silence hang for a minute and encourage you to think about those things. If I could share my gift, it's that I would like to share my vulnerability and my hopefulness, because this conversation matters to me. I'm tired of having it in officialdom ways and not seeing it change. I'm inspired by the calibre of people I encounter in this world, and I wish that I encountered them in so many other places. And I'm delighted when I experience the fruits of your labour. And I get 4 hours sleep a night, so I'm crying. But it is, in a sense, the gift that I have to give you, and I would be grateful to receive the gifts that you have. We're going to take a little time to regroup and come back to our next session, which will start promptly at 11. You may wish to get a name tag, you may wish to avail yourself of a pronoun sticker, you might just like to take a little break and find a coffee, but otherwise I will welcome you back here at 11 o'clock for our panel. Thank you.
close. I feel like I'm stuck.
Oh,
Oh, is it on?
yes, it is that close, and it's on now, apparently.
Oh no. Oh. Yeah, I know.
I don't know, I was just looking at that. Oh my god, I'm so sorry.
Hi, everyone. May I welcome you back to your seats?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. Don't make me get out the iPhone bell ringing noise. Ding, 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 ding. Could those in the back of the room please come to the front of the room? All right, somebody else find the iPhone dinging bell noise. Hang on, I'll Google it.
They're starting to quieten.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to start introducing this panel, but that's because we have a very esteemed chair who has a long bio that will give you adequate time to return to the front. Eugenia is going to poke me with a pen. Sorry. I didn't mean that. She's very esteemed but has an extremely succinct bio. That's how esteemed she is. Eugenia Flynn is a writer, arts worker and community organiser. She has a decade's worth of experience in the areas so close to our heart around arts and cultural development. She's worked for a range of organisations, headed up the incredible social enterprise, the Social Studio, and continues to work now with Rise Refugees, the 11 Collective, the Australian Centre for the Moving Image, is a board member for a number of organisations. She identifies as Aboriginal, Chinese and Muslim and works with those multiple identities to create change through literature, art, politics and community development. I will enable her to introduce our guests for this panel and also to give you some outline of the topic. But we are looking here to begin talking about how we move towards creative self-determination, which indeed are so many of the ideas flagged in Genevieve's first keynote and will no doubt carry through the next day and a half. Please welcome Eugenia Flynn on behalf of this panel, and thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Eleanor. I'd like to begin by acknowledging country and to thank Janet Galpin for that wonderful welcome that we had this morning. And I do that as a protocol for myself as a visitor to this country, to the lands of the Kulin Nation. And it's important for me to make that protocol as an Aboriginal woman, as a visitor to this country, and also to acknowledge a range of different things, to acknowledge the country itself, which is important for us as blackfellas to do, to acknowledge the Kulin nations and the people of those nations for welcoming me to this country, and as part of my sense of culture, my sense of reciprocity and my sense of accountability and responsibility to those communities. I'm here as a visitor and I work in part for them and acknowledge that their sovereignty has never been ceded. I wanted to introduce our panellists. We're going to be talking about creative self-determination, which I think is something that Genevieve touched on a little bit. It came out a little bit in the Q&A with Genevieve. And I wanted to introduce so that we all know who we're speaking with. So I'll start with Fiona Toomey. Fiona is an award-winning screenwriter, director, producer and developer. She's to my left. A graduate of AFTRS, Fiona's screen career includes a range of accomplished short films, screenwriting credits and script development roles. Fiona has also worked in leadership and educational roles across the screen, arts, literary and disability sectors, including as mentor in residence from 2012 to 2017 on the Writability Program for Writers with Disability, a partnership between Writers Victoria and Arts Access Victoria. Currently, Fiona is Artistic Director of the Other Film Festival, Australia's first international disability film festival established in 2005 by Arts Access Victoria. Please join me in welcoming Fiona. And next to Fiona is Tanya Canas. Tanya is a lecturer at the Victorian College of the Arts in social practice and community engagement. She currently sits on the editorial board at the International Pedagogy and Theatre of the Oppressed Journal, and most recently was appointed International Guest Curator at the International Community Arts Festival in the Netherlands. Tanya is also a member of Rise Refugees, Survivors and Ex-Detainees. Please join me in welcoming Tanya. And at the end of our lineup over here, we have Jason Tamaru. Jason is a proud Yorta Yorta man, passionate about his people and culture. He has worked with many of Melbourne's most iconic performing arts companies, museums and festivals. As a producer, he supports his people's creativity by building frameworks that complement cultural expressions. Jason is influenced by anything and everything that stimulates his spirit and soul, and he works to inspire the same passion amongst his communities and peers. So please join me in welcoming Jason.
Thank you.
So we have three amazing people to have this discussion about creative self-determination. And I suppose it's a topic that's quite dear to my heart, and it's something, self-determination is something I place primacy on in all of my work. So I'm really, really excited to be having this conversation here. And I guess I wanted to start with, I've got a real thing about looking back to look forward. And I suppose I wanted to start a little bit with a conversation about the history in the arts sector, particularly in Australia, because we're sort of at this moment where diversity and inclusion has become such buzzwords, and they're also, we're at this moment where we're seeing that emanate out into the mainstream. It's not just in the creative arts, it's across a range of different sectors. It's impacting places like Hollywood and the Oscars. You know, this idea about inclusion and diversity, and particularly for us in the creative arts. So I just wanted to, I guess, start with that historical perspective, because it wasn't always like this. I mean, I remember being a kid and not seeing myself reflected. I read a lot of Enid Blyton books, for example. That was kind of my bread and butter. But, you know, this kind of history, you know, do you think the sector has changed across the years? And what are your thoughts on that for our three panellists?
You want to go?
They don't know where to start.
Absolutely, we're in a moment now where you can so much is happening, but there has been a long fight and a long struggle for that to get to this moment. I have to say too, like, there's a lot of things, and they certainly weren't perfect, but perhaps in the 70s, like there was a lot of fights there as well. So the film documentary I made around Helen Garner's Monkey Grip, and that was focused, you know, I actually through archival research, through the Pram Factory, and there's a whole lot of filmmakers, co-ops, a whole lot of things going on, and that they were fighting just to tell kind of Australian stories, where back then, you know, books would have to go to England to be published. There was still that very colonialist thing. And I mean, you guys can speak to it a lot more, but there was that also, you know, the whole Indigenous, First Nations kind of fight for art and film and theatre and telling Australian stories. And it might seem now it was you know, we can look at it and go, well, why have we still got a problem now? But I think there actually has always been a lot of things going on, but we haven't been able to get to the core to make really systemic change. Or we thought, it's interesting in terms of the film funding landscape. We're in a situation again where all the doors have been opened, anyone can apply, and we had that for a very long time as well. And I wonder that it was like, if you just work hard enough, things will happen. But those systematic and structural things were always there.
Thank you. Jason?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Geez, where do I start? As you was speaking then, I was going back into my mind, thinking about the past, and, immediately this smile came to my face. I remember as a little boy, where was I? Here in Melbourne at this venue, and there was this big rock band going to perform on stage, and this rock band were bigger than Ben Hur. I heard a lot about them, and as a little boy, I was really excited to see them, and it was going to be one of my first concert. So I went there, and I seen this Aboriginal band, Warumpi band, and my God, they have a profound effect on me. Seeing these traditional blackfellows up on stage, singing in language, making the guitar sing, bringing the didgeridoo out, banging those boomerangs together, those cultural dance, stomping the feet, red, black and yellow, punching the chest, the fist in the air, This is something that I really, really dug. This is something I really wanted to feel again and again. So yeah, your conversation brought me there, and I guess for me, self-determination, it's a survival. It's pretty simple, I'm a black Australian. I'm a black fella. We're not meant to be here today. That's the truth. Back in the old days, when my grandparents, they were fighting just to be equal with everybody else. And this wasn't that long ago. And they fought like a lot of other people, so we can be part of this place they call Australia today. So we're welcome to the census. And then in the 70s, this Black Power movement come through, which was self-determination. And that self-determination was a set of rules or principles that were framed for us mob to inspire to, because for us to rely on others to set a scene for us in the future was pretty risky on our part to rely on that mob. So we've had to take some control of where we're going. And right now, I'll acknowledge all those old people that have, I guess, framed my brain and how I think and how I see and how I breathe. And I call to that memory in my brain to shape an engagement that's going to stimulate my own people to soar in this country, which is ours.
Thank you. I know that self-determination as survival is so incredibly important to us mob, and I hear what you're saying about representation playing a role within that. And we heard before in the keynote about representation as we are creating representation within the creative industries. I wanted to unpack the idea about representation and the politics of representation a little bit. And Tanya, I'm going to throw to you because I know that you wrote this amazing article that I reference all the time. about diversity is a white word. You're referencing Ghassan Haj, his work about diversity. And I suppose I wanted to unpack a little bit about that politics. Often the conversation around the communities that we come from kind of sits at a level about pushing for diverse representation, which is important, but what are the power dynamics around this, and how do we push for more than just representation, more than just inclusion in that central narrative? How do we push for real change to that narrative itself?
Yeah, I would like to begin by saying and acknowledging that we are meeting on unceded land, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. If it's okay, I want to conflate the two responses together, so the first question and the second. I remember a time which the arts and diversity were separate, absolutely separate. I would go from my classes at university in the morning and then head to Rise Refugee afterwards, and it was a completely different conversation. The fact that these two sites could interrelate or overlap was not even in the consciousness of coloniality. So over time, this change has happened while I was doing this PhD, and over time I've seen these two spaces begin to bleed into one another. And there's two things I have to say about that. It is easy to talk about the other and continue this otherization when they are not in the room. Mm-hmm. And even when you're in the room and you don't aesthetically look a particular way, that doesn't read a particular way, there are all these assumptions that come into that space about speaking for or speaking about in a very abstract way. So it's dangerous when these two sites start to bleed. It's dangerous for you. There's a lot of culturally unsafe spaces. Because you, in being present there, is a challenge in and of itself, is a site of resistance. And so it's also quite a scary change, I found, that happened, especially in the last 4 to 5 years. There was almost a safety going from just sitting, listening, then going to Rise and being like, oh, this happened, let's unpack this. Because the self was so divided in those spaces. It becomes scary because not only are you in that space to witness some of the pathologizing histories and research about communities that you identify with and histories you're connected to, but it becomes dangerous for yourself and for yourself as part of a community, because then you have questions of, what are the limitations? Am I being a community informant? What can I say? What can I not say? How do I respect my elders? How do I speak about these things while not speaking about these things at the same time in these spaces? Dr. Odette Collada, she's been referenced before by Genevieve Greaves, talked about whiteness as being a virus. And what she meant by this is it changes. It molds into different things across time and across space. So the adaptability of understanding racial literacy as this discussion changes is vital and is really important. These are challenges from, and I've mentioned this in other public sites, something as seemingly simple as fighting to use the term we when talking about refugee, asylum seeker and ex-detainees. So this is writing a book chapter about a particular arts practice, and I was like, I need to use we. This is a methodology. This is what needs to happen in this space. And the editor came back and said, you're assuming that the readers of this chapter are of the refugee, asylum seeker community. And I was like, well, you're assuming they're not. So when these two spaces start to meet together, that's when you see those moments of challenges, which can go either way. And Genevieve Greaves has mentioned before in public, when do you take on the warrior approach, and when do you have to take an approach where that's a battle that needs to be fought a little later? So you know, the other thing I want to say is there's often this misconception about centering voices, and I've been in consultation situations where the conceptual idea of centering voices is exactly what Dr. Nilmini was talking about, which is like, there are key decision makers and we'll invite you for this particular moment to share something, and share something so valuable that they don't deserve to hear and are not ready to implement anyway. And those are also the really the huge challenges of navigating. And I've been in situations where centering voices is literally centering the only POC people in the space into the centre of the space, while the big decision makers who don't identify as POC or First Nations are on the outer side of that circle. And that is so clear, and that is so violent under the gaze of we're including you in this conversation and you should be happy about it. So, you know, I would say that we need to be careful with the institutionalization of these terms. They have a particular history. They have a resistance history in time and space, and it meant one thing there. But with the institutionalization of these things, there comes something with that change. When is it safe to have these conversations according to coloniality, and what is lost in that process? So that's what I'd like to put out there in terms of having these types of conversations. Let me know if I'm talking too much.
No, it's great.
So, you know, what was that last bit of the question about representation. So, Rennie Edo Lodge, who wrote Why I Don't Talk to White People About Race, talked about the representation fatigue. And the way I like to conceptualize that is with this idea of representation, you can tell your story under certain frames, but you cannot theorize about it. You can self-express, but you can't self-determine. And whatever you say needs to be translated by other lenses. So this is what I'm talking about when I talk about the limitations of representation. So what I argue for is that there's representation and there's interpretation. And with the representation discourse, we're often just siloed into this part of things, which means the power of representation, of decision-making processes, of the bigger sort of abstract, the grassroots, and the links are consistently and structurally denied.
Thanks. And Fiona, I'm curious about your work. Fiona, I'm curious about the work that you do with the other film festival, and sort of just riffing off what Tanya was saying about representation and power. How do you, what kind of work, what modes of work do you have, particular methodologies that you use in your work to try and diffract some of those politics around power and representation?
Well, within the disability space, but you know, then disability cuts across everything as well. You know, we have very much worked from a human rights model of the social model of disability, which is, you know, recognised by the UN, and you know, also you know, wanting to speak to too. You know, I do live in a country in Australia, so underpinned in everything I'm doing is recognising that this land was never ceded and there is a process of decolonisation. I'm also, you know, very aware that I am a white woman, a woman, a bit nervous, and you know, it's something that is said. There's a hashtag that exists in Australia, hashtag disability so white, and I've seen another version of that used in the US. So I just want to, as a starting point, put all those things out there and it was the same when I was working in writability in the Writers and Disability program within this building, is that trying to work out that how you know, it's not about, I suppose is acknowledging that context as well. So certainly within, so I'm putting that there very firmly, that's a base we're working from, and I'm not devaluing that in any way. Then within disability, what we talk about too is that the ableist lens. You know, that you know, we see and experience discriminations based on you know, a whole lot of things. You know, just last week, we have a disabled senator in Australian Parliament, and he's been able to push for a royal commission into violence against people with disability, and that includes people with lived experience of mental health issues as well. Because we're still, we're still like, I suppose what, the politics of things that are happening out in society to a lot of people with disability, we're still living in a context where it wasn't that long ago where people were removed and institutionalised. We still have a psych ward system. So I'm kind of going a bit all over the place, but what I'm trying to say is that even the creative things that we're doing, when it comes to programming or choosing films or how we go about it, you still are very aware of all these kind of different elements. And in some ways the other film festival is quite small. At the moment, I work 2 days a week, but it's not 2 days a week in that we don't just turn off. Like, this is our life and our community as well.
Thank you. And Jason, I'd be curious to hear from you, because I know, brother, you've worked across a range of different organisations, and I'm curious about, like, we've heard from Tanya and Fiona about their work, and I'm curious about your work in working in effectively mainstream organisations and how you push for self-determination within them, how you push for that change.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, that's right. I work in some of the institutions here in Melbourne, and right now I'm working at Multicultural Theatre as a producer, and it's hard for me to unpack, and for a lot of people too, being a producer at a major performing arts company. There's a few majors in the country doing some good work, but the thing that freaks me out is I'm an Aboriginal producer. And I'm the only one in the whole land. So unpack that. What you go for a job? What's the job criteria? What's my KPIs? Who am I engaging with? What story am I telling? What values shape the story that I'm doing? There's all these things that are going on. And I guess what my work is, what I do, is I indigenise companies. Straight up, indigenise them. People have got preconceptions, good and bad, what it's like to work and engage with blackfellas and their story. That's nice. But our story is who we are as our identity. And it's a lot of honour for us to tell our story. So in telling that story, we've got an in-depth process that we have to go through. So when our people come to a place like Multicultural Theatre, I need to ensure that a company's a safe place for our mob to come in to tell our stories. Because we've been exploited. We've been using, blackfellas are using glossary magazines in corporate world and in the art world. They love to see blackfellas in their ochre and their feathers, the perfect stereotype to promote that diversity, some reconciliation action plan, something to make them feel good. But sometimes that has a negative effect on the people that are in the game, What we do as people, what I try and do, is create an environment where people can come in and be free. So my job is to educate our company about the history of this country, understand where this story has come from, understand the people who are telling this story, understand the sensitivities of it all, and once understanding all that, give them the right support so we can shine. Because there's a lot of there's a lot of raps, a lot of goodwill, and there's a lot of diversity models out there. But sometimes those models, it's like us dragging a weight. So we've got to drag this weight before we get to the starting line. You know, we've got to skip through all these boxes before getting acknowledged that we are black people, and this is a story we're going to say. So I like to have all these conversations with my company before my mob comes into the place, so we can be free to tell our story, and that seems to work all right.
I love that idea of indigenising from kind of the inside out, as opposed to incremental change or being subsumed into a different cultural shape, effectively. I wondered if Tanya and Fiona had some thoughts on that kind of tension between the two different ways of thinking about diversity and inclusion, because I guess what Jason's talking about is shifting things to the Indigenous perspective, so working from that cultural framework to say this is how we operate, and so that when we operate in that way, that creates a level of safety we're able to push beyond, as opposed to different modes where there might be things like raps, which can be quite corporate and sit within a different cultural shape, and so that's more about inclusion and diversity, about us fitting into their way of thinking. Do you have any thoughts around that, Fiona and Tanya? Or Jason, if you wanted to add?
Yeah, no one wants to be a stat. Stats suck. You know, we're oppressed with stats. Totally over it. No more stats. Just give us a job.
Yes. Very true.
So I recently wrote an article for an upcoming exhibition curated by Andy Butler, and the article is called Creating Sites of Resistance. So it talks about, okay, there's a frame that is produced and that exists in the everyday, including in arts projects, that then get handed to you. And then so when it gets handed to you, you become the receiver of that form, so to speak, whether you want it or not. So this article talks about, okay, there's a site of encounter that happens, and as a person that is structurally, otherwise through colonialism and ongoing border imperialism, what does it mean to navigate in those spaces? Michael Balfour, who's a theatre artist and researcher, talks about beginning to disassociate this idea of creative practice as a huge instant structural change that happens in that moment of that project. He talks about it in moments of change that happen incrementally and in those moments. And so in this article, Creating Sites of Resistance, I talk about, all right, if this is the reality of the structure we're in right now, what does it mean to make those political decisions to be involved, to employ a refusal methodology, as Audra Simpson talks about, or to completely say no to something? And so I frame it like every moment in our practice and in our lives is a political and ethical moment. And that's something that needs to be contextualized with conscientization, double consciousness, borderlands theory. I'm talking about the different frameworks of what it means to live through 2, 3, 4 intersecting contexts at the same time. The way I like to frame my practice is theorizing as, and that's something from decolonizing methodologies. We're not theorizing or practicing for, we're theorizing and practicing as, and that is a huge methodological lens shift in the way you move in practice as much as you move in everyday life. And this is why I like to really talk about our communities are theory. It was disembodied from us through institution. We are theory, we are philosophy. This is a form of knowledge. It doesn't need to be fit into these parameters. Rather, these parameters need to be for our knowledges. So theorizing as, something, for example, like my PhD confirmation seminar, I had signifiers for members of my community who I'd invited, including family and friends, which was only for them to read. And they were the only ones in that space who read it, and that was okay. So I often talk about speaking for and against at the same time. There are signifiers that you can speak directly to who you identify with out in the audience or out in an article or out in a book chapter. And these are the moments that are really important because it's something that I wasn't able to pick up when I was reading articles about how to do applied theatre with disadvantaged communities. Like, these are the moments that change an entire practice. So speaking for and speaking against, and if you don't get it, then it's probably not for you, and that's okay.
Thanks. So I think I'll speak to this in a context of access and inclusion. So a lot of, most organisations, if not everyone, will be like, oh yeah, I've got access and inclusion. And they'll think, and there'll be things that we're looking at. But often, we still think of access in terms of, well, can you get into the space? But not so much what happens, and I should also acknowledge there are a lot of people that for various reasons can't get into a space. And particularly, members of our community who are homebound and or bedridden. And I know some of those people may be watching this live stream, so I acknowledge you. But yeah, it's about, once we're in this space, but we're not actually thinking how is that space constructed or what power plays are sort of going on. So, like if you're someone who lives with a lot of chronic physical pain, how does that shape your lived experience? If you're deaf, if you're vision impaired, if you're neurodiverse, if you have and a lot of these are labels, but if you have a mental illness. But so I suppose it's getting down to, so much power structure is still based on what's considered, normal. But there's so much difference. There's so much, there's many, many ways of living and being and experiencing this world. Feeding into what you're saying, if you're setting up a project, is like, well, whose power are you privileging? If, you might say, well, okay, it is going to be Auslan interpreted, but, no one from the deaf community came. But then it's like, well, what work are you doing to actually, work and engage with the deaf community? So there's a whole lot of things about, I suppose, how welcoming your space is, but also just then what we're what we're sort of saying, well, this is, if it's still going to be about a certain cognitive privilege or a certain way of being, I don't know, and there could be, whether there's a safe space set up for this symposium. Some people might want to have a quiet space, like some time out, and that could be because of the sensory needs. The way the lighting is, a whole lot of things. But when it comes to projects and moving forward too, is like, how are you setting that up? And they're things that we give a lot of deep thought and a lot of work to, but that's where I'd like to see not just the arts, but a society kind of, moving forward.
Thank you. We've talked quite a bit about diffracting or that breaking up of that kind of central power. And I'd like to shift away from that because we're talking about creative self-determination. And I'd like to hear, before we throw to the audience, because we're sort of trying to keep on time, but I wanted to hear, from the field, in the work that you do, what are some, it might be one project or it might be something that you do in your own practice, a set of principles or piece of work that you've done where you felt like this is a really good example of kind of best case self-determination within creative industries. Do you have something, or do you feel like that's something that we haven't, or that you haven't achieved yet in your own creative practice?
Yeah, deadly question. Self-determination, selfish, cultural determination, community determination, mob determination. Yeah, it's a little bit to unpack. Not really. I guess it's like everyone, when you do your work, you want to have confidence and the people that you're working with. I guess I'm in a good position because I'm a producer. So I produce the world I live in a creative sense. So in doing so, I guess I sort of use a set of values when engaging people I want to work with. You know, integrity goes a long way. Community understanding, cultural obligations, family, responsibility, understanding social, cultural awareness, you know, all these things that hold dear to me, the people that I work with, I hope they've got similar tastes and similar interests. So I guess, and that's white, black, green, it doesn't really matter, you know. Yeah, I just choose to work with people who've got similar thoughts and interests and beliefs on what they want to do and where they want to go, because, you know, it's a bit of a cliche. Well, it is a cliche, but I believe this is what I do. You know, I think the world's shit. You know, it's shit. It's a shit place. I'll say it. I don't want to improve it, you know? And that's what my work's all about, improving this world that we live in. Yeah.
So that's about your power and what you allow yourself, who you allow into your space and how you work with them. Yeah, as a producer, I think that's great.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll work with everybody, but, you know, if something's not right, I'll let you know. Straight up.
Thanks. Tanya?
Yeah, I actually want to do a little quote, which I think really summarises, and it's something that I've taken on board as a practitioner and in daily life and in my research as well. So Ngui talks about self-determination, and they define it in the book Decolonising the Mind as the ever-continuing struggle to seize back creative initiative in history through the real control of all the means of communal self-definition in time and space. So that's a really beautiful sentence. It's a chunky sentence, but a couple of things speak to me in that. And it's the ever-continuing struggle. It's continuous. You have to keep working at it. It's a struggle. And I situate that word struggle in the history and the context of the way Chicano and Latinx movements have used that as a power stance. Creative initiative. It talks about the real control of all those means, not just the representation, but the interpretation and how that changes over time. Self-determination is not a singular self, it's a collective self, and that's the other important point to make, and that it changes in time and space. And it needs to keep changing in time and space as the institutionalization of issues and communities and peoples changes. So, to add to that, you know, you talked about what are some good examples. For me, Rise Refugee was a wonderful example of how organisationally speaking, structurally speaking, what self-determination can look like, I guess, as a structure, rather than a moment in time and space. There's just a singular project. What brought members of Rise together is that experience, is that lived experience of violent displacement, of border imperialism. So even in that, bringing us together as that lived experience, that particular struggle, we were already working outside of nationalistic frames, colonial definitions of this country versus that country. We were talking about what are the connections here and what do these connections mean in the context of being in Australia now, and therefore the performative pressure to perform white Australia. And what does that mean to unpack that? So there's a wonderful program that continues now that Rise is doing around sanctuary and sovereignty. And it talks about exactly that. What does that mean for us in this time and space? How do we align solidarity with First Nations peoples here? How do we privilege that way of knowing and that way of being in this space, rather than, although that pressure is quite intense, to perform white Australia? and to perform more than whiteness itself. So that's been a space for me, as I mentioned, has been, you know, the best supervisors, the best thinkers, the best philosophers have been in that space, of which, structurally speaking, have not been acknowledged in another way, but are doing the work and are doing it apparently not overtly to dominant consciousness of institution.
Thanks. Fiona?
So I think within a disability arts culture context, it's very much, often there's a lot of focus on individuals, and that is important, but I think definitely understanding the systematic and structural issues at play. And, you know, I mean, I've got Caroline Bowditch not far away looking at me there, but I think what's been great with Caroline coming in, who's not only an artist and a maker, but having been living in the UK and working in Europe and the US over the last 16 years, she's bringing this international perspective, but very much, you know, being embraced in an Australian context. And the things that we're sort of seeing and hearing that are happening internationally, particularly, you know, I'm talking more of the UK, I think is very exciting. And to be trying to bring that here is, I hope it's where we'll start to see some serious change, where people with disability are really valued, first and foremost as people, and as artists. And, you know, something that happened last year, so within, you know, I'd actually never been to a disability arts culture conference before, and I got to go to Meeting Place. It was in Alice Springs last September, and I lobbied the hosts, Arts Access Australia, to say, can we do something around film? Because I've sort of felt very much within disability arts culture, it's often focused on the streams that happen through the Australia Council. And a lot of things that was happening more in the screen space felt really ad hoc. So we had this panel, and we had, I was able, you know, Courtney Gibson came, who's now the CEO of the South Australian Film Corporation, but is also the chair of the SDIN, the Screen Diversity Inclusion Network here. And we also had someone from Screen Australia, and so I was thinking, you know, this panel, it'll kind of, will sort of mark the landscape a bit in disability arts culture, but kind of a reverse thing kind of happened in that we were quite surprised once we started saying all the different initiatives, particularly that have really been happening over the last 2 to 3 years in the film space, led by Screen Australia and the different state funding bodies, just how much was happening. And it still felt ironic because the film industry itself it is still very conservative, and at the core it's driven by marketplace and commerciality. But like was mentioned before about Hollywood, there's this kind of impetus in that people do want to see change, but also they're aware that they're missing out on audience. And so I suppose at this actual point in time, I just feel like I've got to keep, not just as individual, we should all find each other and just keep pushing and pushing and make sure those doors do not close again. And then we get to the centre, and that centre changes completely and acknowledges all the things that you are both talking about as well. But, you know, just don't want words like diversity or marginalisation, all those things, you know, in my, I mean, sort of Pollyanna-ish, that doesn't exist anymore, and that we can just make that change.
Great, thank you. We've got some time to throw to the audience and take some questions. We probably have about 10-15 minutes. I'm going to try and keep us to time so that we can make it to lunch on time. But yeah, just raise your hand. I can see we already have one question. And if we could keep questions brief and more questions than statements, that would be wonderful.
Hi, my name is Creatrix Tiara, and a lot of my work often has to do with like the various intersections of my identity. But one thing I found frustrating, and I want to know if that's also something any one of you in the panel have experienced, is that there's this expectation that you can only make art about your identity. and you can only apply to jobs, opportunities about your identity. And you can't really do whatever else or get involved or apply for anything else that's nothing to do with who you are as a person. And have you faced that yourself in your work, and how do you deal with that, and how would you recommend like those in the position to like put out these job applications or produce work, make it more equitable?
Yeah, well, yeah, I'm an expert. I'm an expert when it comes to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stuff, for sure. So come to me when you're looking for stuff. But, you know, this thought, this mind, this creative buzz that's internal within me, you know, it doesn't just stop and engage black people. It engages everybody. So when working at a mainstream company, it has all different nationalities coming through that door. I like to give them the Jason buzz, you know? You know? Start thinking like an Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander, you know? It's a different way of thinking. It might be able to help you with the work that you're doing, help you personally, and connect you strongly with your own people. Because again, you know, I'm framed by those values that I said before. And we work in this world of art where sometimes these things get a little bit lost, you know? So it's just good to remind people of these values and using that to engage not just my own mob, but everyone else. I'm not just restricted to the colour of my skin. Sure, I'm an expert in it. I know how to swim in it, that's for sure. But I reckon what's in my skin can convey to other mob too. Yo.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Tanya, Fiona?
Yeah, it definitely can be an issue, and I think we don't have to. I think we have to fight not to accept it, and you know, once again, it's reflecting a lens. It's got nothing to do with you or any of us, but often that lens or that there's this box, and they want people, oh, we've ticked this box now. I think it's really important because it isn't easy. So it's important to have community and, you know, to find those people that we can reach out to and that we can kind of support each other and kind of build stuff. So, and when that happens, you know, it is personally frustrating, but also like, I think that's where organisations, you know, like Arts Access Victoria or MAV, Multicultural Arts Victoria, or the different orgs here in the Wheeler Centre or wherever, you know, I think it can, you know, and hopefully that's what might come out of these 2 days too, is that there is more opportunity to kind of connect in with people, even if it's just having a chat or sending, you know, a DM via Twitter or whatever. So I'm certainly not dismissing it's going to just go away or it's easy, but I think we can all try to find each other and work together to make that change, and that you shouldn't be the one having to do the calling out, but if someone does, if you do need someone to do that, there is a, you know, I'm going to mention names now, but there is a Caroline Bowditch or a Veronica Pardo or a, you know, whoever to do that with you, or do it anonymously, but to do it.
Thanks.
This is kind of the trap of the diversity discourse, and Sarah Ahmed really talks about it brilliantly in her books, sort of articulating that if there's a particular role that is purely that role, diversity, there might be something, there might be a greater issue institutionally in that particular context, especially if it's burdened on one person to do that, and especially if you're only allowed to speak in that manner through the role rather than through everyday practice, and it's denied in every other way, structurally speaking. You know, to quote Bell Hooks, speak but don't speak in the voice of resistance is often the trap that we find ourselves in. And we have to be conscious that we are still in this particular dynamic and we are still subject to it. Even if we have double consciousness, even though you feel like you might be woke, you're still subject to these ways of reading your body, the way in which your body is read in space. And so I kind of want to argue for the acknowledgement of that, and it's going to happen whether you want it or not right now. This is where we're at. So to purely try to say, this is not going to happen, I'm going to do this in my practice, is almost a denial that that's actually what's structurally happening right now. So I really challenge artists to acknowledge it, to find ways to play with it, because if you completely disregard it in your practice, you might fall into that trap of reiterating, because that's not where we are at structurally right now. You know, an example is, so for my thesis, I wrote about performing credibility, which is you're constantly in a position where you have to perform a credibility, whether that's whiteness, whether that's you as an academic, whether you are actually, you know, part of the refugee community. There's always a sense of performing a sort of credibility that is denied of you. So you get stuck in this trap of, oh, they need to know this, and I need to tell them this, and I need to, like, and then that in itself becomes exhausting. So I would say open up the value systems in which you have and be like, well, sometimes some spaces don't deserve my story or don't deserve to know that about me, because they wouldn't know what to do with it. Not right now. They do not deserve it. I was told once by a former supervisor, and you're already dealing with issues around, you know, am I worthy in this space? You know, all these sort of issues about being present in a very, very violent white space. One of my former sort of mentor supervisor said, oh, your ideas are not as important as you think they are. And I think, you know, that wasn't a claim to my arrogance, because I was feeling really out of place at this particular institution. And that in itself is telling you about the constant devaluing of what you bring into a space, and having to be careful about what you share, because what you share is so important that institutions with the structure and the resources to put things in place will lift it, will translate it, will change it, and then use the same terminology. And what happens then? So they don't deserve it.
And absolutely, and in what you were saying, it's important to have mentors. That's what I have. I think sometimes people get to a position of leadership and they don't have that elder or mentor to sort of support them or give them that guidance through some obstacles. If you're working in an organisation, you're by yourself, you know, it's friggin' lonely, mate. It's a lonely place. You know, it's okay when everyone's happy and, you know, feeling real sweet, but there's days like within our community, my community I come from, you know, we've got some horrific stuff that goes on, and, you know, these things that you see in the media, we live and breathe it every friggin' day, you know, so it's alive and well. So when you're in a place and you're feeling a little bit vulnerable, you know, you want to rely on, call on people around you to offer to support. But if those people haven't come from that particular place, you don't really have those supportive structures or supportive tool there. So if you're in a place by yourself, and even with a few people, it's a good idea to have a mentor, a couple of mentors around you, so you can just bounce and release some of these things that might be troubling you.
Good advice, thank you. We probably have time for one more question. I'm sure I saw a hand further up the back.
Hi, Samsara again. I was just thinking in terms of the structural issues and stuff, and how over the last, 5 or 10 years, job description forms and application forms have included what the physical requirements of the job are before you even pull out your resume. This is obviously probably more targeted to the disabled side of the conversation. So you know, how does a person, like, and I know that has happened with other areas of diversity as well. It's just this is the one that sort of seems like people pass it by and they don't even notice it anymore. And I think it's a good thing. How do we break those structural things down? You know what I mean? Like, you're already cut out of the conversation if you can't climb 3 levels of stairs or such.
No, and thank you for that question. It's hugely important. Lots of structures, not just in the arts, but in our society, are just not inclusive of many people. And, certainly in job contexts, there can be medical reasons. Say, for example, that someone's not allowed to drive, and then there was a job advertised recently for the ABC, and it was meant to be like a cadetship, and one of the things was you had to have a driver's license. And so we've got these, on the one hand, that's what I was trying to say before, on the one hand we'll say, oh yeah, it's all about access, but then when you actually go down to there's really systematic things, and it can be just the way you're framing and your position descriptions, if predominantly the jobs and the jobs of power are full-time, that precludes a lot of people as well. Just think about it, for example, to be a politician in this country, you have to be able to work a lot of hours. So...
And be a dumbass.
Yeah. Well, in theory, work a lot of hours. So in terms of that this sort of hierarchy, the so-called career ladder, it's not inclusive, it's not accessible. And I think that's when we start to really get down to looking at real systematic and structural change. And there can be many other reasons, not just because of disability or illness-related issues that could, if English isn't your first language, depending also what kind of visa you have, a whole lot of things can just preclude you and push you away and keep you out of the workforce, or keep you out of the workforce for a long time as well. Something I've learnt to do is to look at CVs very differently, and also to know some people won't even have a CV. And I think that's something that funding bodies and different organisations, not just when you're recruiting, but when you're putting together your funding programs and different things, need to be aware of that. When it comes to, say, living with a chronic illness, you have times where you just have to take yourself out. You're either not well, or there's a whole lot of other discourse around, being a carer, which I'm also a carer, but, parents, there's a whole lot of reasons, and we're not actually, those conversations are still tricky, but the trickle-on effect, it's not even a trickle, it can be catastrophic for some people, a lot of people.
It's sorry to hear if you're having any trouble in that sense. It really sucks. So I also acknowledge that. I think that if there's an obstacle in the way, something preventing you from doing what you want to do, I'll go hit them between the eyes. Knock on the door, go talk to the boss, the bosses, whoever's running the company, and let them know your thoughts and your feeling. And if they don't want to respond, or just close the door on you, go to the media, expose them. Go somewhere, highlight the place where you got a rank response and put the blowtorch to them. That's what I say. True. I had experience. That's what happened to me. That's how I got my job. I was at a major performer where I'm working now, and I got a job. It was a bit of a tokenistic position, and when I started there, I was a lone ranger, which I am still, but I was sitting in a corner, feeling cold, and no one showed any love towards me. And after 2 days, I had a gutful. So I knocked on the big door and told them my thoughts and feelings, and I'm glad I did, because things shifted, changed straight away. And that's a true story.
Thank you.
I also just want to acknowledge that those moments shift as well, that sometimes resistance can look a number of ways. Sometimes it is banging down the door, and sometimes it needs to look strategically another way. And Chicana theorists have talked about that's a form of navigation. They frame it as a sort of guerrilla warfare, where it's just like there's visibility, then you're invisible, then visibility, and just because it's an ongoing struggle, we really need to clock those moments. And sometimes this, in the context in which we're in, the overt, most loud, I think culturally sometimes is preferenced over other forms of being in a space that are culturally different, and is unable to read some other ways of resistance that are just as valid. There's also gender politics in that too, and historically too.
Thank you. We're going to throw to Eleanor for some housekeeping and to move us through, I guess, the next steps of what's going to go on. But before we do that, please join me in thanking our panellists, Jason, Tanya and Fiona. And now to Eleanor.
Thank you to you, Eugenia, also for stewarding that conversation through some incredibly diverse terrain. I will not make them linger on stage too much longer, but we have now a break for lunch. I would just like to indicate that those of you who have asked for dietary preference or have access requirements, the lunches are just at the back of the room. And then we actually have a number of spaces where people can access lunch and then take a little bit of time out. The first two places are on the 3rd and 4th floor, which are accessible by elevator or stairs, and there are some small breakout rooms if you'd like to take some time there. There's also a larger space downstairs at the moat, also accessible by downstairs elevator and then stairs, where there are a number of lunches, but we are going to exit this space. You can self-select which of the various places you would like to take your time, or equally out in the beautiful sunshine. And we will reconvene here at 1 o'clock for Deborah Williams, who is our international keynote from the Creative Diversity Network. I look forward to seeing you just before 1. Thank you again.
and I can't turn